These women agreed to speak publicly to show there's another side to Roy Moore.
President Trump calling for Roy Moore to step aside if the allegations are true.
The Washington Post that dropped that dime on Trump dropped the dime on Judge Roy Moore. Is that a coincidence?
This was his first project, and it is blown up on the Republican Party.
He continues to stand. The chances of the Democrats picking up that seat go up considerably.
The White House announcing President Trump will not hold a formal sit-down with Vladimir Putin.
The Kremlin spokesman said there would be a meeting.
Russia clearly involved itself to change the American election. Leads up to the question, is there a crime committed?
This is New Day with Chris Cuomo and Allison Camerata.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to your new day. The White House and Republican lawmakers calling on Alabama's controversial GOP Senate nominee to withdraw from the race if allegations of sexual misconduct with several teenage girls are true. A defiant Roy Moore denies the Washington Post report. He calls the accusations, quote, a desperate political attack, and he vows to stay in the race.
President Trump, of course, is in Asia, and that trip is being overshadowed by these political turmoil events here at home. The eyes of the world are going to be on whether or not Mr. Trump meets with Russian President Vladimir Putin at an Asia-Pacific summit in Vietnam. We'd been told it was on, then the White House said it was off, but the Kremlin said it was on, and now they're both saying that there is a scheduling conflict. We have it all covered for you. Let's begin with CNN's Martin Savage, live in Gadsden, Alabama. How is this story about Roy Moore playing there?
Morning, Chris. This is all coming down as a huge shock here on a number of levels. Of course, the seriousness of the allegations that are being made against Moore, but then on top of that, the timing just weeks before a critical election. And they all go back to this town and the courthouse right here. The Trump administration responding to the bombshell allegations that Alabama Senate candidate Roy Moore sexually molested a 14-year-old girl over 30 years ago, with a nod to both Moore's conservative supporters.
The president believes that we cannot allow a mere allegation, in this case one from many years ago, to destroy a person's life.
And establishment Republicans like Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell.
However, the president also believes that if these allegations are true, Judge Moore will do the right thing and step aside.
McConnell saying Thursday that if the allegations are true, Moore must step aside. Concerns echoed by a growing list of Republicans on Capitol Hill.
If they're true, he should step aside.
If that's true, I don't believe there'd be any place for him in the U.S. Senate.
But Moore is digging in, denying the charges and blaming the, quote, Obama-Clinton machine's liberal media lapdogs for the vicious and nasty round of attacks, and vowing to never give up the fight. President Trump's former chief strategist, Steve Bannon, standing by Moore, whom he championed during the primaries, comparing the timing of the Washington Post report to the release of the Access Hollywood tapes just before the 2016 election.
Now, is that a coincidence? That's what I mean when I say opposition party.
Lee Corfman says she was 14 years old when she was approached by Moore outside a courtroom in 1979. He was a 32-year-old assistant district attorney. Corfman says he offered to stay with her while her mother went inside for a hearing. She says that Moore got her phone number and later took her to his house on 2 separate occasions.
On one of the occasions, undressed her, undressed himself, and, touched her over her bra and underwear, and guided her to touch him over his underwear.
She said she was uncomfortable after that incident and asked Moore to take her home, but never reported his behavior to police. 3 other women sharing troubling stories about Moore in recent weeks, telling the Washington Post that Moore pursued them when they were between the ages of 16 and 18, while he was in his 30s. But none allege forceful sexual contact. Moore, a devout Christian, is no stranger to controversy, remarking just this year that he thinks that the September 11th attacks was God's punishment for America's lack of morality, and telling a reporter in a 2005 interview that homosexuality should be illegal.
Just because it's done behind closed doors, it can still be prohibited by state law. Do you know that bestiality, the relationship between man and beast, is prohibited in every state?
One of the things that really impacts here is not that it's just politics we're talking about, Allison. It's also about faith, which is deeply important in this part of Alabama. Roy Moore has made it a point throughout his political career
to stand strongly for what he says are his deep religious conservative beliefs. If these allegations are true, they call into question all of that for many of his supporters.
Well,
Allison?
Absolutely, Martin, and we'll just see how this plays out today and in the days to come. Thank you very much. So Republicans in Washington are reeling over these allegations against Roy Moore. Could this scandal put the party's narrow majority in the Senate at risk? CNN's Brianna Killer has that side of our story. She's live on Capitol Hill with more. Hi, Brianna.
Hi there, Allison. And that's really the concern, especially after the elections on Tuesday night, where Democrats really swept in gubernatorial, mayoral, and state legislative races, as well as ballot referendums. It put Republicans on notice, and that was one of the reasons why they wanted voters focused so much on their unveiling of their tax reform plans in both chambers yesterday. But instead, the focus was on Roy Moore as Republicans struggled to deal with this topic. Take a look.
Senator McConnell, do you believe the women who made these accusations against Roy Moore? Leader McConnell, do you believe these women?
Incredibly awkward there as you see Republicans smiling and trying to ignore questions about this. The official word coming from Mitch McConnell and so many Republicans is that if these allegations are true, Roy Moore should step aside. But make no mistake, they do not want Roy Moore here on Capitol Hill, and they're hoping certainly that that's not going to be the case. But they also realize that it's out of their control. The former chief of staff to Mitch McConnell saying publicly on the record, quote, this is what happens, quote, when reckless, incompetent idiots like Steve Bannon recruit candidates. Republicans already had issues with Roy Moore. He was so controversial. He wasn't their pick. But at this point in time, they also realize they may not have the ability to control this. This really comes down to the state party. If they're going to ask the Secretary of State in Alabama to invalidate Moore's nomination as the Republican candidate, and it comes down to the Alabama voters, because Roy Moore is going to be on the ballot, and really some of this out of Senate Republicans' hands, but that may be part of the reason why you're hearing them say, if true. They're not necessarily sure exactly where this fervent Republican base that backs Roy Moore is.
Brianna, so interesting to figure out the timing of all of this. Thank you very much for the reporting. So joining us now is reporter and editor-at-large for CNN Politics, Chris Cillizza, and associate editor of Real Clear Politics, A.B. Stoddard. So, A.B., let me start with you, because obviously Republicans don't need this. This is not what they wanted. You can see them all across the gamut trying to figure out the response. So let's just juxtapose what we saw from Majority Leader Mitch McConnell there and his sort of what appeared to be like gritting his teeth and smiling awkwardly through these questions and then trying to sort of shoo reporters out of the room, with Senator John McCain, who, as you know, has been sort of, I guess, a truth teller, or at least unplugged in the past couple of months. And he just unequivocally said, we have a tweet from him that we can pull up, the allegations against Roy Moore are deeply disturbing and disqualifying. He should immediately step aside and allow the people of Alabama to elect a candidate they can be proud of. What are you seeing happen?
Well, it's interesting. Chris pointed out on Twitter this morning that these are not allegations, they're accusations, because the women are actually telling the stories themselves and accusing him of doing this, which is quite strong, and people should read the piece because it's pretty solid. That said, Republicans are in an awful jam. You have Alabama Republicans saying this is fine. You have every Republican in the Senate in Washington, including Vice President Mike Pence, coming out with very stern statements saying, if true, this is not acceptable, that his candidacy is not sustainable. This cannot be proven. This cannot be prosecuted. Roy Moore is defiant. And what's interesting about sort of the larger question of what goes on in the Republican Party, this is an amazing situation. The Republicans in Alabama defending Moore are basically admitting it's true and saying there's nothing wrong with it. And then you have Steve Bannon saying that it's all a conspiracy from Jeff Bezos of the Washington Post and Amazon, and he's going to be as defiant as Roy Moore about this. There are people saying this is only going to increase his support. All the evangelicals will rally to support, just like they did with President Trump after the Access Hollywood tape was released. So don't be surprised if senatorial Republicans have to turn around in a few weeks and say they backed the nominee and everything's fine. Because unless Roy Moore finds the better angels inside of him, if this is true, and then backs down himself, I don't see anything changing. I see him winning the Senate race and coming to town.
Well, they do have a problem if he has to step down, though, Chris, because his name, I think, under state law would still stay on the ballot, so he would certainly split the ticket. But, you know, even that suggestion, that level of analysis kind of betrays the significance of this. They got to balance their moral agency, which is so important to that party, with the political expediency here. So Bannon comes out and says, wow, I can't, the timing, you know, sure, you talk about the timing because you don't want to talk about the substance of the suggestions and the accusations. These kinds of things often come out at the end of races. And by the way, probably plays in favor for Moore on one level because they don't have a lot of time to decide what to do here. And if he gets elected, it's really hard to remove him. So when you look at this, what is the question for Republican leadership right now about how to deal with this?
Yeah, look, I'd say moral agency is critical to both parties, right? You have to show that you are willing to stand up for what is right, even when it is not politically the most
they bring up Christianity very often. Roy Moore is running as a Christian. You know, this was controversial because of that even beforehand.
The statements that you saw, well, you didn't see McConnell say anything in that one, but that clip you played, which is amazing. But he put out a paper statement essentially saying what every other member of Congress, Republican member, said. If true, then Roy Moore has to step down. That feels like a Band-Aid to me that won't suffice all the way through December 12th if Moore does stay defiant and stay in the race. To me, it's not a he said, she said here. It's 30 sources. It's 4 women named and on the record. I don't think...
By the way, so it's not like they dug up some Democrats to come out with a bunch of accusations.
4 women who did not know one another. 4 women who did not reach out to the Washington Post, who only spoke when contacted by the Washington Post.
30 surrounding sources in terms of corroboration for their reporting.
Correct. So to me, Chris, it just feels inadequate to say this is fake news. What does that mean? It doesn't. That has no meaning. When you're talking about allegations, accusations that are this serious, I don't think any right-minded person should just say, "Yeah, this is fake news." Maybe said the most important thing: read the story. I guarantee you, if you read the story, you are not going to come out of that thinking this is some slapdash attempt. Hit job piece. I just think what Roy Moore has said is inadequate, and I think that will come into play with Senate Republicans. John Thune is the number 4 ranking Republican in leadership, said if he does the right thing, it won't be a problem for us nationally. Well, of course, he thinks the right thing is Roy Moore getting out. I don't think that's happening, and that means that Senate Republicans are going to have to go further than they have.
Yeah, Roy Moore has said more than just this is fake news. I mean, he was active on Twitter. So let me just read you, A.B., a couple of things that he said. The forces of evil will lie, cheat, and steal, even inflict physical harm if they believe it will silence and shut up Christian conservatives like you and me. That's just one of the 4 tweets that we have. I mean, he is, at the moment, digging in. And by the way, I mean, I think that you've made the point. When we've seen this deluge of accusations against powerful men, the powerful men who have admitted it in some way or apologized for something have lost their jobs and fallen. I'm thinking of Kevin Spacey. I'm thinking of Harvey Weinstein. The powerful man who didn't admit anything about the accusations and called it locker room talk was elected to the presidency. So you have 2 models of how you can choose to go with this.
Right. And that's the thing, is he's going to be urged by his supporters and Steve Bannon, who, you know, is championing his candidacy and is banking a lot on this, literally in millions of dollars of funds to his, his insurgent revolution of purifying the Republican Party of all establishment incumbents. And he is going to be urged by everyone to continue to fight. And then, as I said, it's remarkable that the Republican officials in Alabama defending him basically agreed that that the story was true, but that it was fine. What a statement that says about what Alabama Christian conservatives will do on December 12th.
The state auditor, Ziegler, you're talking about, who said In terms of the age disparity.
Okay, so listen to this. I mean, it's just...
This is how we do it, by the way.
I know. You tee it up and then I deliver.
You do these dramatic reads,
I know, thank you.
which is good.
Okay, there is nothing to see here. The allegations are that a man in his early 30s dated teenage girls. Even the Washington Post report says that he never had sexual intercourse with any of the girls and never attempted sexual intercourse. Take Joseph and Mary. Mary was a teenager and Joseph was an adult carpenter. They became parents of Jesus. There's just nothing immoral or illegal here. Maybe just a little bit unusual. Well, that's not true. It is illegal.
I mean, Allison, it is state law in Alabama now that if you try to lure someone under the age of 16, just lure them into your home for the purpose of sexual intercourse, that is a felony. So watching what the Christian conservative supporters of Roy Moore will do and say in the weeks to come, the actual voters, will really truly be interesting. I really believe cynically and sadly in our tribal politics of late 2017 that people will say, oh, he's not a Democrat. Jeff Bezos is out to get him. They will rationalize everything, and it's what we've seen with people rationalizing President Trump, because it's always about his opponents. It's never really truly about whether or not character counts, whether or not it's moral agency. It's in the end, this year, what we've seen the most of is that it's always about their opponent and not really about what they've done.
And I think if you put party over principle, again and again, true of either party, at the end of the day, what you have as a party is not anything that you want to defend or sell. I mean, that's, winning a single seat in Alabama is the focus here, because they're worried that if they run away from Roy Moore, Doug Jones, the Democrat, who polls already suggest is closer than you would think, will win the seat. He would hold it effectively for 2 years, because in 2020, a Democrat running in Alabama would have a tough time winning. But the bigger damage to the party of saying, this is fine, this is okay, just switch it around. Imagine if it was a Democrat and what those same people would be saying. I guarantee it wouldn't be Joseph and Mary comparisons.
All right. Chris Cillizza, A.B. Stoddard, thank you very much.
So, is Trump going to meet with Putin or not? Will the President of the United States make this very important meeting with the Russian president? First it was yes, then it was maybe. Now we're saying there's a scheduling conflict. That's what we're told. CNN's Jeff Zeleny live in Vietnam with more. What do you make of the vagaries of the certainty about this meeting?
Good morning, Chris. It's not uncommon for meetings like this, particularly on the Russian side, to not exactly be scheduled. This happens in previous meetings, but I can tell you, trying to cut through all of this has been difficult. The White House says a formal meeting is off, even though President Trump said just a week ago he wanted that meeting. The Kremlin is saying a chance encounter is likely. One thing we know for sure, this is all shining an even brighter spotlight on that Russian cloud that's still hanging over the White House.
A highly anticipated encounter between President Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin, under negotiation for days, is awash in confusion this morning. White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders telling reporters a scheduling conflict will prevent a formal meeting, although the two leaders could still cross paths.
Are they going to bump into each other and say hello? Certainly possible and likely, but in terms of a scheduled formal meeting, there's not one on the calendar. We don't
just today.
That there will be one.
The president's 13-day trip to Asia continues to be overshadowed by a series of events at home, including developments in the Russia investigation, which is growing even closer to the Oval Office. Senior policy advisor Stephen Miller, seen here with the president aboard Air Force One, has been interviewed as part of special counsel Robert Mueller's probe. Sources close to the investigation tell CNN. Miller is the highest-ranking aide still working at the White House, known to have spoken to investigators. His role in the firing of FBI Director James Comey was among the topics discussed as part of the inquiry into possible obstruction of justice, a source told CNN. The president's longtime confidant, who delivered the letter of Comey's dismissal to FBI headquarters, Keith Schiller, also wrapped up in the investigation. Schiller testified behind closed doors to the House Intelligence Committee this week that he rejected a Russian offer to send 5 women to Trump's hotel room during his 2013 visit to Moscow for the Miss Universe pageant. Schiller told House members he took the offer as a joke, sources told CNN, and Mr. Trump, then a private citizen, laughed it off. The president remaining focused on a series of priorities here in Da Nang, amplifying his call to confront North Korea's nuclear ambitions, and again pledging that his administration would do what his predecessors did not, and close the trade imbalance with countries like China.
I am always going to put America first, the same way that I expect all of you in this room to put your countries first.
Now, coming up shortly here, President Trump and President Putin are heading to a dinner with other world leaders. So it is possible that they could cross paths there, even have a conversation. They also have an opportunity for that tomorrow. But Allison, this is all playing out against the backdrop here in Vietnam of Da Nang, the city of Da Nang, which of course was the site of the first U.S. Marines who came here at the beginning of the Vietnam War some 52 years ago. Of course, the view of the United States here has changed over the years. One thing is not. Of course, in America, we call it the Vietnam War. Here in Vietnam, they call it the American War.
Oh.
Allison.
All right. Thank you very much, Jeff. So there are these mixed messages about a Trump and Putin meeting. If they do meet, what will they discuss? Our national security experts join us next.
The Wall Street Journal adding some new details to a story first reported by CNN. So here it is. Special counsel Bob Mueller is investigating an alleged plan for fired National Security Advisor Michael Flynn to forcibly remove a Turkish cleric living in Pennsylvania. The Journal reports Flynn was offered up to $15 million to deliver the cleric to the Turkish government. Jim Grimaldi is one of the Wall Street Journal reporters who broke this story. He joins us now. Timing is important. Jim, thanks for being on the show. Appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome.
There was a meeting in September, allegedly about this, reportedly about this, and now one in December. So that would be after the election and after Flynn was named as the National Security Advisor. Is that right?
Right. What we understand the FBI is investigating is an alleged meeting that took place in a restaurant at the 21 Club in New York City sometime in mid-December, and in which Mike Flynn attended. They've asked at least 4 people about this, and from what we understand, there was discussions of as much as $15 million, the possible involvement of Mike Flynn's son, who was an advisor at the time as well to Mr. Flynn, who'd just been nominated and named as National Security Advisor. And it's really pretty remarkable meeting that would happen after this earlier September meeting, which, as you noted, the Wall Street Journal reported, and then CNN also reported exclusively with one of the participants, someone who unwittingly went to the meeting, Jim Woolsey.
What does that mean? Help us understand the context of Woolsey's involvement and what the reckoning of what your sources reveal about what the expectations were of the second meeting.
Well, yeah, the expectations of the second meeting were to get him out of the country. As you know...
So these people actually thought that the National Security Advisor, who was operating under color of agency for the United States of America, would cut a contract deal to remove somebody, kidnap somebody from the United States?
Well, yeah, that's the remarkable part of this allegation. What's being investigated is that there would be actually cash payments involved with his removal with someone who at the time was working for the transition, had been nominated, then became the National Security Advisor before he was then fired by the president. So, yeah, it's a pretty remarkable allegation that's being investigated by the FBI and being investigated rather seriously. We've actually known about this allegation for quite some time, but with the work of my colleagues Shane Harris and our Justice Department reporter, we were able to find some corroborating information, and I think the FBI investigation has gone forward. But as you recall, you were asking about Jim Woolsey. Yeah. He kind of unwittingly showed up at this meeting. He didn't know that's what it was going to be about. And then he blew the whistle on this in a story that ran in the Wall Street Journal, and then he went on CNN later that day to talk about it.
The timing, really relevant. There's no question that Flynn has been a proponent of getting rid of this cleric. He wrote an op-ed, I think that came out on Election Day, about exactly this. But if this happened, this kind of meeting with this bargain for exchange and a potential kidnapping of a legal resident after the election, when he was named NSA, that has some heavy political and legal implications tied along.
Very, very serious legal implications. I mean, obviously, if you're working for the government, even in the transition or what have you, you can't accept cash for any official action.
Yeah.
That's considered bribery. We don't know that any cash was transferred, but our understanding that cash was discussed at this meeting, and that's what the FBI is investigating.
And it has been reported that Mr. Flynn was worried about the exposure of his son. His son has been implicated in this meeting. So there are some dots being connected in terms of the mentality of what's going on with this investigation. James Grimaldi, thank you very much for the reporting and coming on New Day as always.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Okay, Chris, let's discuss with our CNN national security analyst, Samantha Vinograd, and CNN counterterrorism analyst, Philip Mudd. Samantha, you just heard the reporting there from James Grimaldi. If Michael Flynn, who was the incoming national security advisor, was operating outside of the bounds of legal U.S. extradition and trying to send this Muslim cleric back to President Erdogan in Turkey, what does that mean?
That means that we should all be very worried, and that means that there's another thread in this investigation that's already consuming the administration. It is no secret that President Trump and the administration are distracted by the investigation at a time when they should be focused on direct national security threats, like, for example, Russian meddling in the election.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fair to say that much of his 12-day Asia trip, a hugely significant foreign trip, has been overshadowed by all of the stuff that is happening here at home, including all these latest threads that involve Michael Flynn.
Exactly. And now we don't even know if Trump is going to meet with Vladimir Putin, which means that Trump isn't going to have an opportunity to hold Putin accountable for interfering in the election, the digital warfare campaign on U.S. technology platforms. And he's leaving the door wide open to another Russian attack and sending a signal to leaders like Kim Jong-un that the United States doesn't respond to direct attacks on the homeland. That's a dangerous message to send to a guy who's threatened to launch missiles at the United States.
Surprising that Putin isn't pushing for the meeting, given that the President of the United States has said that the investigation into Russian meddling is a witch hunt. You know, he'd be on pretty safe footing, it seems, but it seems like it's not going to happen. Phil Mudd, the implications to this. There had been political spin that, hey, look, whatever Flynn did, it's really just about money and accounting and what they call the FARA requirements, F-A-R-A, it's an acronym, you can go look it up for yourself, that this is different. This is after the election, in December, once he's nominated as NSA. So what does this mean in terms of the implications for the investigation?
There's a couple of differences here. As you mentioned, the critical point here is this happened after the election. The simple question, obviously, Chris, is whether something illegal happened, whether there was a conversation about money in exchange for action on this cleric that the Turks desperately want back in Turkey. There are a couple of subsidiary questions, I think, that we haven't talked about, but that are critical. Number one is ethics. If General Flynn has a relationship, a pre-existing relationship with the Turks, when you go into an official position in the White House, you ought to be declaring on paper what your previous relationships are, so that when there are follow-on conversations in the Oval Office, everybody knows We had the Mueller team drop a 1001 violation, that is lying to a federal officer, 2 weeks ago on Papadopoulos. That's that individual who was part of the Trump team during the campaign. The reason General Flynn is worried is that if his son knows something embarrassing, and his son will be interviewed separately by the FBI, and his son lies during that interview, I'm not saying he will, but I'm saying that's something that they should be concerned about, then the feds will drop a 1001 violation on him. That is, again, lying to a federal officer. He ought to be worried that his son is completely truthful in that interview, because Mueller has shown that he'll take you to the woodshed if you're not truthful.
But that's a 1001 violation. A felony. You know, carries, I think, up to 5 years.
Are you going to make me go look it up?
No. I don't know why you don't like getting more information, by the way.
More homework?
Some would say it's our job. But what I'm saying is this. I think that this is more by legal construction. If he had this meeting, and you got to put an if on it, right? They're going to have to vet it out. But this is a discussion about a potential kidnapping plot of a legal resident of the United States. I mean, Sam, am I getting the analysis wrong? I mean, there's an extradition procedure for someone who's a legal resident here if you're going to return them to Turkey. If he was saying, let's cut a deal, let's even take the money out of it. Let's say there was no money or it wasn't for this. Let's just take it out of the equation. Okay, yeah, I'll get him out of the country. We'll put him on a private plane and we'll get him out of here and we'll do outside the normal procedure. I mean, why isn't that kidnapping?
Well, it definitely...
I mean, it didn't happen, right? But I'm saying, if that were the discussion.
What I can tell you is that when I was at the White House, this was definitely not the sort of thing that we ever discussed when it came to bilateral relations with Turkey. We talked about leader-to-leader conversations and bilateral irritants, but we certainly didn't talk about cash exchanges to remove people from the United States and to ship them back to Turkey.
Thank you for that perspective. It's always helpful to have somebody who was there at the State Department of the White House. Thank you very much, Samantha Vinograd and Phil Mudd. New allegations seem to be coming out every day, and the last 24 hours have been no different. 2 more high-profile men accused of sexual misconduct. We talk about where we are in the culture today.
He's coming right over here.
In the past 24 hours, 2 more high-profile men have been accused of sexual misconduct. GOP Senate candidate Roy Moore, who was accused of having an inappropriate relationship with a 14-year-old when he was in his 30s. Moore calls these allegations a political smear. Also, 5 women have come forward in a New York Times report accusing comedian Louis C.K. of inappropriate sexual conduct. The Emmy Award winner has not responded to those allegations. So let's talk about all of this. And joining us is Susan Ho. She spoke out about her experiences with sexual harassment in Silicon Valley at our town hall last night. We also have CNN legal analyst Ariva Martin. Ladies, thank you so much. I mean, the conversation just continues every day. I don't think I'm exaggerating, Ariva, to say that there are new allegations. They come out against powerful men with almost household names every day. So when you see now Louis C.K. and he's being accused of, and Judge Moore, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, you're right, Allison. I think you and I have been spending a lot of time together this week talking about these issues. I think what struck me about the Louis C.K. story was hearing the women again talk about the fear of retribution, talk about the fear of coming out in terms of what it would do for their careers, and 2 of the comedians saying that they feel like their careers were actually impacted in a negative way because they did come out. They said that there were conversations with his manager that they felt were threatening. Although the manager said he never threatened them, he didn't exactly deny talking with them and perhaps asking them to stop telling their stories of Louis C.K. masturbating in front of them in a hotel room. So I think one of the big takeaways from all of these stories is that even when women come out, the common theme is the fear, the fear of being isolated, ostracized, and their careers being ruined in ways that are irreparable.
Yeah, I mean, career suicide is, Susan, something that we have heard about that prevents women from sharing their stories. You know the Silicon Valley culture well. So is it the same where there are these open secrets about people? I mean, with the Louis C.K. thing, most of us didn't know this, but people in the industry, these female comedians, say that it was well known and it was an open secret.
I mean, absolutely. Justin Colbert, who harassed me and my co-founder during our fundraising process when we were raising money for our company, we found out that there were allegations against him that went back 10 years, and that there was actually a woman who at his previous VC fund had kicked him off of her board because he was propositioning her for sex.
I mean, if only you had known these things. You know, this is the thing about the silence and about the secrecy, is that it ends up then creating other victims, other accusers, because you go into it blindly and don't know. You asked a question last night at the CNN town hall, and I just want to play it for our viewers in case they missed it, because, I mean, you say that this is the elephant in the room. So let's listen to this.
How can America drive real progress in addressing sexual harassment of women and men in Silicon Valley, in Hollywood, in all industries, and in everyday places when we have a man sitting in the White House who's boasted on tape of grabbing women's crotches and is currently facing allegations of sexual harassment himself?
Gretchen Carlson says she gets that question every day now that she's begun speaking out about sexual harassment. Have you ever heard a good answer to that one?
Not quite. I asked the question because for me, it's not that we don't have laws in place. We shouldn't have to have laws to, dictate what common decency is, right?
But we do. I mean,
but at the core of it, the culture is broken, right? We have a culture in which women in the workplace aren't seen as colleagues, as leaders, as equals. And, when we see the message being sent out, which is, the message that we want to send is that no matter how much money or power that you have, you can't engage in this behavior. It's not okay. And there will be consequences. And so how can we really be serious about that when, the elephant in the room is, hello, who's sitting in the White House right now?
Ariva, what's the answer to that?
Well, the reality, Allison, is that powerful men have been and continue to be given the benefit of the doubt when we talk about sexual harassment and sexual assault. When that tape came out with respect to Donald Trump, when he was then candidate, Donald Trump, Christian conservatives were the first to give him the benefit of the doubt, to talk about forgiveness and the reason that the country should not count him out as a candidate for presidency. And that continues to happen from the highest level in the White House to CEOs and other men in powerful positions. Think about how long it takes for some of these stories to come forward. In some instances, we're talking about decades and decades of stories about abuse. And in many cases, it takes women, not just one, but multiple women to come forward before anyone starts to believe that these stories are true. That's just something we have to continue to deal with, continue to fight against, both legislatively and from a culture change. And I think we're starting to see a breakthrough. There is a light at the end of the tunnel, and I'm hopeful. As a civil rights lawyer, I've been involved in this kind of litigation for 2 decades now. Something feels different about this moment.
It sure does. I mean, when you see powerful men like Harvey Weinstein, like Roger Ailes, like Bill O'Reilly, like Kevin Spacey, like James Toback, you know, people are talking about it. They're naming names. People are losing their jobs. People are having to re-edit movies at great expense because they don't want the liability of having one of these men. So, Susan, do you think this is a real tipping point? Does it feel the same way to you?
I hope so. I hope that this drives real action and real change. And, you know, as we were talking about last night, it's not an issue that we as women can say, hey, you know, we're going to talk about it, we're going to fix it. We need men to be just as involved in the solution. And, you know, Matt McGorry was saying yesterday, if you are not actively doing something to address the problem, you're part of it.
Susan Hope, thank you very much for your question last night. Thanks for taking part in the town hall. And thanks for making all of those points. Reba Martin, great to see you. I'm sure we'll talk soon. Yes, Chris.
Well, you got to keep it in the dialogue. Otherwise, it goes away. And Susan makes a really strong point. If men aren't involved in this, the culture won't change. It just won't happen. So coming up, they go beyond the call every day, and we get exclusive access to New York's hostage negotiation unit. Next. The New York Police Department has an elite hostage negotiation unit, and they were the first of their kind in law enforcement in the entire country. CNN was given exclusive access to this team. They regularly go beyond the call of duty. Here's Bryn Gingras with the story.
Somebody's wanted for a crime who will not come out of a house they barricaded themselves in.
3 or 4 blocks, you're going to make a left on.
What you see here happens almost daily for Lieutenant Chris Zimmerman, head of the NYPD's hostage negotiation team. CNN was given exclusive access to Zimmerman and his team of 125 negotiators. He's the only full-time officer in the unit, and with 28 years on the job, Zimmerman could have retired nearly a decade ago.
I don't look for the easy way, never did. I also enjoy the challenge, and I like to know I can help somebody. I will tell you that some of it is taxing. You talk to somebody, you create a bond, and all of a sudden you hear this person at their worst moment. They may be a father, they may be a mother, and then what we look for is something that brings them back to reality.
Just trying to calm this guy down and forget.
And that's why Zimmerman says he handpicks the unit, only choosing negotiators who have experienced pain.
So I interviewed this guy and we're talking, and I go, what makes you want to be a hostage negotiator? He turns around, he looks at me, he starts crying. Okay. He goes, my son is as big as me. He goes, he's autistic with improvised explosive disorder. I've had to handcuff my own son 4 times. Done. If you could do that, you could do anything.
Last summer, Zimmerman found himself talking to this man as he tried to climb Trump Tower with suction cups.
So we started to talk to the kid. He responded a little bit. Thank God that emergency service detective reached out and grabbed him, because I don't know how much longer he would have been able to manipulate himself.
On this call, a man barricaded himself inside his apartment. He'd taken his girlfriend hostage. For our safety, we were kept the floor below where negotiators and tactical teams worked.
He's got a real violent history. Our victim is in there, we got to get our victim out.
After more than an hour of talking, detectives made the arrest. The man's girlfriend was found safe inside.
At the end of the day, it all comes up to human life. It's all about helping somebody who's in crisis.
So in those moments, do you feel like a hero?
No, it's not what I signed up for. Do my job.
Bryn Gingras, CNN.